And we welcome you back to the show. The Corporation for Supportive Housing is advancing solutions using housing as a platform for services to improve the lives of the most vulnerable people, maximize resources, as well as building healthy communities. We have with us now the Metro Region Director at Corporation for Supportive Housing, Patricia Hernandez. And Patricia, good to have you.
Hi, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Glad to have you. And so when we talk about supportive housing, I think sometimes many people have different conceptions. But before we get into the work that you do, how do you define supportive housing for somebody who may not be so familiar?
Sure. So the basic fundamental is supportive housing is affordable housing with flexible wraparound voluntary services. So everybody who's in supportive housing, it's an affordable housing unit. They have their own lease, it's permanent housing, and they are able to access wraparound services. For instance, they usually have a case manager assigned or a social worker that connects them to mental health services, employment, and other things.
And when we talk about supportive housing, that's the work that you do, right? And really helping people to have housing, better housing. When you look at the state of housing right now, how do you see it?
It's very challenging. I think we're in a housing crisis, not just here in New York, but across the country, specifically an affordability crisis. So, what we try to do is make sure that there's enough supportive housing development coming through the pipeline. So, at CSH, we are a lender and we provide lending products to organizations interested in developing supportive housing. So, when we think of trying to really increase the supply of supportive housing. We do that through our work. We do a lot of policy and advocacy to ensure that there's the right budgets for supportive housing, that it's easier to access for folks, and really focused and have been working a little bit with the administration here in New York City around better ways to access supportive housing and just in general develop more affordable housing.
And when we talk about supportive housing, affordable housing, there's always been the question about race and how race plays a part in this. When you look at race, ethnicity, and demographics, talk to us about the equity that you see and what's needed from your perspective.
Absolutely. So, when we look at the homeless system, there's no surprise. Black folks and people of Hispanic backgrounds are overrepresented in our shelter system. They're also overrepresented in crisis systems. For example, emergency rooms, hospitals, jail, prison, all those spaces. So, what we really think of supportive housing is being able to target those very vulnerable populations and ensure that they're able to have access to quality housing. Really thinking about different approaches to make sure that we're including equity, that we are giving a lot of support to particularly Black and Hispanic folks when they come into the housing, looking at different populations. So for instance, a large population, unfortunately, a lot of Black men are involved in the criminal justice system, and they historically have had little access to supportive housing. So thinking about ways that we can create better access and bring out our advocacy tools in order to make that happen.
And when we talk about making things happen, obviously you're spending a lot of time on the front lines really trying to make things happen. Give us a little bit of background into the initiatives that you have that really deal with this and really trying to combat some of these challenges that we're talking about.
Yeah, and definitely, if I'm on the front lines, but really we work very collaborative with our community-based providers who are the ones on the ground doing the work. But some of the things that we are working on, so we have this initiative that CSH actually has had launched for quite some times, and it's an initiative that's around the country. It's called Fuse, Frequent User Systems Engagement. And it really is the thinking that for people who are experiencing, who are moving through crisis systems, shelter, jail, street, emergency rooms, that the intervention that can help and get them stabilized in one place is supportive housing. So what the Fuse initiative does is get all the crisis systems together, look at a subset of people who really are not getting connected through these systems and targeting them to get them into supportive housing. And it's really a housing first approach. Get them in through the door to get supportive housing, and we can worry about everything else later. And I think what's really great about this approach is there's a lot of data that's shown that by giving somebody supportive housing, you're going to see decrease in Medicaid expenditure and other costs that could be better suited putting into the community. So of course, it's much more expensive to keep somebody in jail than it is to keep somebody in supportive housing. So our thinking is that by intervening and really creating this community-based approach, we're able to save the city and the state lots of dollars, and hopefully at one point those dollars can continue to be reinvested into supportive housing. Another initiative that we are working on is called the RACE initiative, which stands for Redesigning Access by Centering Equity. And this is our goal to increase the development of supportive housing by engaging more BIPOC developers. So Black people, Black Indigenous people of color. And we're doing this through some of our lending products. So being able to provide, our loan and also provide grants to folks, helping them with technical assistance and extra technical assistance, especially if they're new to the field. And we think it's very important to target this population in particular, because as we know, there's still a lot of systemic racism, and we hear that folks are still having challenges accessing capital. So how can we advance and make sure that BIPOC developers are getting the same opportunities as other types of developers, and making sure that they're going to build in the neighborhoods that we want to see building, and that they're going to serve the population that represents them.
And when we talk about the population, we know that the demographics of New York City are changing, and they're changing rapidly. How have you been able to deal with the rapid change in generation, I mean, in demographics, and then also, it is when I use the word generation, there also is some generational shifts that are occurring too. What are you noticing from your perspective on the housing market by way of trends that maybe we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think we're seeing increasingly more families entering homelessness, which is never good. But also that lets us to think what kind of housing is out there, right? Are we developing more studios or one bedrooms? Are we really developing family size units? Given that the demographic and there's increased families going to the shelter. Another piece that we are focused on quite a bit is the older adult population and how they're aging in supportive housing, and what are some of the supports and accessibility issues that folks need to maintain their home and age in place. So we're doing a lot of capacity building and a lot of advocacy around that in particular.
And when we talk about advocacy, some of the great work that you do doesn't always get highlighted, right? So, talk to me about the impact of what you feel uh, the agency's been able to have on people's lives, given the fact that this is such a crucial part of someone's everyday life and what somebody needs to function in society.
Mhm. We really work closely with our collaborators and our partners around funding for supportive housing. I think we've been very successful in partnership with our collaborators to get last year's administration, Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo, to put money into supportive housing with commitments that are 15 to 20 years of supportive housing development. So that's been amazing. We are working now really hard on expanding services in supportive housing to make sure that folks who are providing the supportive housing have a living wage, and also that organizations have enough money to provide the expert services that they have. Also thinking about how do we make supportive housing accessible? And I spoke a little bit earlier about people who are leaving incarceration. So we're doing some advocacy around changing and adjusting some eligibility definition to not make people coming out of jail ineligible for supportive housing, but rather make them eligible. So making some shifts in language and really thinking about jail as a homeless setting, that when people leave, they're still considered.
And when we talk about how we can expand the field, what are some of the ways that we can go about really expanding this market to really reach more people?
Definitely more education on what supportive housing is. I think a lot of folks still have misconceptions, engaging affordable housing developers and really making the pitch that adding supportive housing units to their development is actually a benefit. That means increased services into the community, increased services for their building. So I think it's just more of that and more funding for supportive housing. The special sauce in supportive housing is the services funding. So being able to for the providers to be adequately funded really allows us to bring in comprehensive services to those most in need in supportive housing.
For yourself, when we look at where things are and the way things are going, talk to me about what you anticipate seeing over the course of the next year in this area. Do you feel like the attention will be given in the manner, we talk about our elected officials, we talk about other community-based organizations that are really grassroots of doing the work. But sometimes it seems as though handicapped in being able to do the work. Do you feel as though you have enough support in this area to really be able to make some necessary change?
I think we're getting there. I think that's always a challenge. What can, city and state government do? There but there are a lot of challenges happening right now. There's a big homeless crisis. I know, having folks who are migrants coming into New York has also added to the stress on the system. So we have to think about everybody and how to move people out of shelter into permanent housing. I think we have a lot of great groups that have wonderful ideas how to create access and how to, things around anti-discrimination. For instance, we have a bill out there to remove criminal background checks for people going into housing. That would open up the door for so many people who have the money to pay for the housing, have the stability, just can't get anybody to rent to them. So I think the more we push on those bills and the more we get community-based organizations and continue to knock on the door of city government and electeds, I think we can go somewhere. But it takes a long time. It's quite hard.
Yeah, and Patricia, I know we talked a little while ago about some of the benefits of supportive housing because when you talk about people who are in substance abuse or people who may be coming out from incarceration, one of the biggest challenges I think that really happens is stability. And if you can turn the corner on stability, there's so many things that can happen in a person's life. But um, give me a little bit more about that and share with us a little bit more about that because you really are in the work that you're doing, helping to provide some stability in areas where people are really, really needing a good hand up.
Absolutely. It's extremely difficult to maintain sobriety, take medications, take care of your health if you're on the street. For example, like, outside of CSH, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, so I work directly with clients, and I've worked with people that have diabetes, that have substance use issues, that have mental health, and they're not able to take their medication on a regular basis. They're not able to make it to their appointments. So as much as they want to do better and feel better, they're not able to do that while living in a street or in a shelter. So having a place to live, a place where they can rest, a place where they can uh, think about what they want to do with their life, a place where they have support from case managers and other, really, really makes a difference. And it helps people thrive. It's not just giving somebody an apartment and giving a key and say goodbye. It's giving that plus what else do you need to make sure that you have a quality life, that you're thriving in your community. So I think there's no replacement for housing. Housing is foundational.
So when we look at the work that you do, obviously very intense, very hands-on. Um, Give us a little walkthrough as to if you have a client, how you're able to really take that client from point A to point B.
So just to confirm, we don't work directly with people, but we work with organizations to help them build capacity and provide the resources.
I should
So,
apply.
yep. So, but still, we're kind of part of all the systems, like from entry to lease up. So, a person usually a lot of the connection to supportive housing comes through somebody who's in a shelter system and is identified as having chronic homelessness, meaning they've been on the street or in a shelter for prolonged periods of time, might have a behavioral health issue, might have HIV/AIDS, youth that are aging out of foster care. And the way it works is they would work with someone in the community, a case manager or social worker or other, to complete a supportive housing application. So access to supportive housing is all through a system called Coordinated Assessment and Placement System. And there's an application that determines the person's eligibility for supportive housing. Once that's determined and they're approved, then there's an interview process, right? So the clients and the supportive housing providers actually meet each other. The client gets to see their unit and decide whether or not that's the place that they want to live. It sounds easy, but it takes a long time, right? If we think about, the application could be a little bit lengthy. You need a psychiatrist or a clinician to sign off on the application. And with limited mental health resources in the community, it's really hard to find those supports. And it just takes a while because there's not a lot of vacancies available for people with certain eligibility. So it could be any between, you have your approval to maybe 6 to 9 months down the line where you're actually in an apartment. So it can be quite stressful. And I think the way our system's set up is it's really hard to connect people to supportive housing when they're outside of the shelter system. And this is something we're trying to make better. If somebody's in a hospital, if somebody's coming out of jail, if somebody's in a treatment facility, how do they gain access to supportive housing so they don't have to enter the shelter system and wait for things to happen on that side, but we can really prevent that homelessness.
Hey, Patricia, let me ask you, are you optimistic, given that we're, at the start of 2023, that when it comes to the issue of supportive housing, that we can see some great turnaround this year?
I'm really optimistic that, there's a lot of plans for funding supportive housing in the governor's announcements and if her state of the state address. I think, it was a great move that in the mayor's administration that he hired a chief housing person to really take a look at some of the gaps in housing. So I think there's some steps. I think there's some investment, and we just need more. Right, we just need to continue because I think there are a lot of folks out there who have a need. There's about 70,000 people in just shelter alone, so we need that investment. But I think I'm optimistic that the city and state can work together, and really optimistic for what Governor Hochul has put forth so far.
Yeah. And so, for people who want to find out more information about how to get connected with you, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, you can visit our website at csh.org/metro. So one thing to know about me and my team, we not only work in New York, but we do a lot of strategy, advocacy, and programmatic work in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania. So again, you can look at our website and there's an ability to contact us at csh.org/metro.
And I want to thank you for coming and sharing with us today. I like to say that when it comes to supportive housing, it really is beneficial to so many people who can just get a hand up. And stability, as you mentioned, is one of the things that uh, many people lack. And you can't get stability until you get housing. But thank you for the work that you do.
That's
Thank
right.
you for being a great partner in the work for supportive housing. And great to have this conversation with you, Patricia.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All righty. We want you to stay with us. We got more forums. We encourage you. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.